You know, it's funny. Sometimes the biggest, most important breakthroughs don't come from success. They come from complete and total disaster. We tend to think of catastrophes as the end of the story. But today, we're going to look at how one of the biggest crises in ancient history wasn't an end at all. It was a radical new beginning for how we worship.
Seriously, think about that for a second. Everything, and I mean everything you rely on for your faith, the place you go, the people who lead, the rituals you do, is just gone, wiped out. This wasn't some thought experiment for the ancient Israelites. This was their new reality, and the way they answered this question literally changed the world.
So to really get a handle on this revolution, we first have to understand the sheer scale of the collapse. It was total. The year is 586 BCE. The absolute unthinkable happens. The Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, the center of their spiritual universe, is burned to the ground. But it gets even worse. The entire religious leadership, we're talking the high priest, all the priests, the Levites, everyone who knew how the system worked, is rounded up and marched off into exile in Babylon.
This wasn't just a bump in the road. This was a complete, catastrophic system failure. The one sacred place was gone. The experts were gone. The temple itself was a pile of rubble. The way people had connected with God for hundreds of years just stopped. It was impossible, overnight.
So what exactly was this world that just vanished into thin air? To appreciate what they built, we have to first understand what they lost.
So, First Temple worship was this huge, physical, and super centralized operation. The best way to think of it is a blood-based system. Everything happened in one single building, the temple in Jerusalem. Worship was all about animal sacrifices carried out by professional priests, backed up by huge choirs and musicians. Bottom line, if you wanted to worship, you had to go there.
And this lays out the problem perfectly. That old, blood-based system, it was spectacular, no doubt, but it was incredibly fragile. Because it was physical, centralized, and totally dependent on the priests, all you had to do was knock out that one central point, and the whole thing came crashing down. What rose from the ashes was the exact opposite, a word-based system, one that was portable, decentralized, and built to last.
This crisis basically forced one of the most important religious innovations in all of human history. The system didn't just break, it was like God hit the hard reset button.
This quote just nails it. The exiles stripped away all the external stuff, the building, the altar, the sacrifices. It forced the people to ask a really raw question. How in the world do we worship now? And the answer they found was to turn to the one thing nobody could take from them, their words, their stories, their laws.
And this is the new model that's born, word-based worship. Instead of one massive temple, you get these small, local community gatherings called synagogues, which literally just means prayer houses. So what do you do there? It's simple. 3 things that don't need a priest or an altar. You sing the scriptures, you pray as a community, and a teacher, a rabbi, gets up and explains the word. All of a sudden, faith could travel.
So how'd they actually pull this off? Well, they dug in and elevated all the parts of their faith that didn't need a priest. Things like the Sabbath meal, led by the father right in his own home, became super important. Keeping their identity through food laws became its own act of worship. And, most importantly, they started a massive project to write everything down.
I mean, think about how huge this is. The terror of losing their entire culture pushed them to create what we now know as the Hebrew Bible. A faith that was mostly passed down by word of mouth was now locked into writing. It was a survival tactic that created a foundation that could never be burned down or torn apart.
And this change wasn't just a temporary patch to get them through a tough time. Nope. It created a whole new blueprint for what worship could look like, and the aftershocks are still felt today.
And you can see just how powerful that blueprint was right here. Look at the core of a Jewish synagogue service that came out of the exile: singing, praying, and a sermon. Now look at a pretty standard Christian church service. What do you see? It's the exact same pattern. We sing hymns, we have a corporate prayer, and a pastor preaches a sermon. The very first Christians, who were all Jewish, just took this resilient, portable synagogue model and ran with it. And that's the amazing legacy, right? An innovation that was born out of pure desperation, created a form of worship so flexible and so adaptable that it didn't just save one ancient religion. It also provided the essential DNA for another one to spring to life.
Now, this ancient story isn't just a cool history lesson. It really forces us to turn the mirror back on ourselves and ask some pretty tough questions.
This whole story makes you ask a really challenging question. How much of our faith today is tied up in the external things? The fancy buildings, the slick programs, the charismatic leaders. Is it really portable? If all of that disappeared tomorrow, what would actually be left?
So in the end, the Babylonian exile teaches us that a truly resilient faith invests in things that can't be destroyed. It puts a higher value on community than on buildings. It values knowing the text over just performing a ritual. Ultimately, it's about building a faith that you can carry with you anywhere, a faith that doesn't live in stone and mortar, but in people's hearts and minds. And that's a lesson from a long-ago catastrophe that feels more relevant right now than maybe ever before.